In this video, we're going to take a look at the actual movement of the micromirrors that are on a digital micromirror device, also called a DMD chip. Now, DMD chips can be found in, for example, DLP projectors, which are better known as beamers. And I will show you a method by which it's possible to look at the movement of these tiny mirrors in real time, while at the same time slowing down their motion by a factor of 1800. I know this sounds rather impossible, but not if you use a stroboscopic camera. A DMD chip contains a very large two-dimensional array of tiny mirrors. So a full HD projector contains around 2 million of them, and they can all be switched off individually, actually with high frequency, so up to 20 kHz. The mirrors themselves are approximately 10 by 10 microns in size, and they can be switched between two different states, so flat and tilted. Each mirror represents a pixel on the projection screen. Now here's the schematic of the principle of a DLP projection system. To the right, a high intensity light source which is illuminating the DMD chip under an angle. Now if a specific micromirror is in the flat state, the light is reflected off the surface with the same angle as the incident angle, and it ends up on a beam stop. However, if a micromirror is in the tilted state, the light of this mirror is reflected into a lens and can then be projected on a screen. So this is the principle for 1-bit monochrome images, and of course we want to project color images. And in the case of color images, an additional component is needed. For color imaging, a fast spinning wheel with color filters is placed between the white light source and the chip. And this makes the light of the source periodically change color very quickly. During the time that a certain color filter passes by the light source, the mirrors can actually be switched on and off multiple times. And by combining the different colors, we can in this way project almost any color. For example, let's take a look at what happens if we use a color wheel with 3 fundamental colors, so red, green and blue. As you can see in this additive color scheme, if we want to produce the color magenta, we should mix the colors red and blue. So if we translate this to the movement of a micromirror, the mirror should be in the on state for the primary color red, in the off state for green, and in the on state for blue again. And if we want to display the color white, we have to combine all the 3 colors. So the mirror should be in the on state for all 3. Now, if we want to display the color gray, this can be achieved by switching the mirrors to the on state only a small fraction of the time for each color. And in a similar way, we can in fact generate almost any color by just changing the fraction of time that the mirror is in the on state for each color. In the DLP projector that I use for this demo, there's actually not 3 different color filters but 6. So in addition to the colors red, green and blue, we can also project white, yellow and cyan. This is basically to improve the dynamic range and color purity of the projection. In the case of the 6-segment color wheel, the switching is actually done in a very similar way. The only difference here is that for some colors, extra yellow, cyan or white light are mixed in for a better color quality. There's one more related topic that I would like to briefly touch upon. It's actually quite advanced, but I need to mention it because it can be observed later in the video. So when displaying a specific color, the mirror is actually not in the on state for one extended period of time, but it's generally switched on and off multiple times. And this is because of the way the images are processed internally in the beamer. So to display an RGB image, it is first split into 3 fundamental color frames, and then each color frame is split into 8 so-called bit planes, which contain the timing values of 1 to 128 units. Now, for example, if we want to display an image value, intensity value of 164, this is actually not done in one extended period of 164 units, but in 3 consecutive periods of 4, 32 and 128 units of time. So the mirror switches on and off multiple times to achieve the required average pixel intensity in several steps by modulating the time that the pixel is on. If you consider all this, there's actually quite a lot of calculations that need to be performed, and at the heart of all this processing there's a very advanced driver chip that does all the math required to split the video stream into colors, bit planes, and then takes care that each individual mirror is on at the right time to achieve the best possible color. And the chip does so all in real time, which is actually kind of mind-boggling. So let's quickly move on to how we can make the switching scheme of a DND chip visible. So how can we observe these very fast movements that take place during the color cycle, which is only 1/60th of a second? Well, we could, for example, use a high-speed camera and then look back at the image after recording them. However, there's a much simpler method. By just using a stroboscope and a relatively simple camera with a very limited frame rate. For example, in my case, the frame rate of the camera is only 20 Hz. But first, let me explain a bit about the stroboscopic effect. It can be used to study rapidly reoccurring processes or events, such as, for example, rotations in a machine. And what we do with a stroboscope is illuminate the object of the study with very short light pulses, let's say in the order of 10 to 50 microseconds. And we do this at a frequency which is very close to the frequency of the reoccurring event. So we use these light pulses to observe only a very short time frame in a specific event. In the reoccurring event presented here, the process under study is actually something very arbitrary, which is a change in color from white to blue. Now, this process is reoccurring with a frequency f1. And if we observe this process with a frequency f2, then what you observe is that the observations are actually sort of sliding through the different stages of the event. Actually, we do not make observations during just a single event, but each observation is made during a different instance of the event and in a later stage. So what we see is that if we add all these individual observations together, the process seems to occur with a frequency which is equal to f1 minus f2. So if the two frequencies are very close together or even equal, then the process seems to occur in slow motion or appears to be standing still. Now let's make this a little more clear with an example. I will show you what you observe when you look at the rotation of the color wheel of a projector when using this method. Here I placed a uniform stroboscope flashlight behind a rotating color filter. So the full rotation of the color filter is the reoccurring event, and the frequency of the event is equal to the refresh rate of the projector, let's say 60 Hz. By choosing the flash frequency close to the rotation frequency, for example 60.01 Hz, we can in fact slow down the apparent spinning of the wheel to 0.01 Hz. So while still rotating every 60th of a second, the wheel actually appears to be rotating only once per every 100 seconds. And this effect can be very useful for studying all kinds of fast repetitive processes while they occur. And by changing the frequency, we can actually speed up or even reverse the process, or, well, at least make it appear that way. But if the apparent movement of the filter wheel can be slowed down in this way, it might also be possible to slow down the movement of the DMD mirrors. After all, this is also a periodic process. Now, one problem is that a microscope needs a lot of light, way more than, for example, a camera lens. So I made a stroboscopic flash unit to achieve a very high flash intensity. It contains 4 high-intensity LEDs that are all directed towards the center of the unit, and the unit is then placed in close proximity of the DMD chip. Now, the total setup looks like this. It consists of a microscope with a camera, and the camera controls a driver board that produces the very short pulses to drive the 4 high-intensity LEDs of the stroboscopic flash unit. In order to study the movement sequence of the mirrors, I made a test pattern with some different colors on it. Small 7x7 pixel blocks of the 3 fundamental colors, red, green and blue. in the highest brightness, but also in a 50% grayscale. And I also added the pure colors yellow, cyan and magenta, and I also added 50% grayscale blocks of these colors. Now in addition I added pure white and 3 different grayscales of white, so 75%, 50% and 25%. And I copied this test pattern several times in order to make it easier to find with the microscope. So here's the full setup: the camera, the microscope, the stroboscope unit, the projector with the DMD chip exposed, and the PC to observe and record the results. The complete sequence of displaying the different colors occurs within 1/60th of a second, and due to the stroboscopic effect, the length is actually stretched to a period of 30 seconds, which means it's slowed down by a factor of 1800. But the funny thing is that we're actually looking at it in real time. Okay, so let's go into a little more detail here. There's actually quite a lot to see. I display 3 things here simultaneously. So to the left, the observed DMD mirror patterns, and in the top right you can see the position of the color wheel, and in the right bottom, for comparison, the test pattern that was used. And you can actually see which pixels are switched on while a specific color is projected. So let's briefly look at the sequence again, now even more slowed down, so by an additional factor of 2. We start out with white and then with the yellow. Now yellow is not in another color, so this is the only pixels that are on. If you move to the red, then you actually see that this red color is also in yellow and in magenta, so the yellow and magenta pixels are also on during the red filter cycle. And if you watch closely, then what you see is that there's also this duty cycle in the grayscaled areas of the different colors. Now another thing you notice is that in the white color you actually see this bit plane switching, so they're on and off and on and off, and the darker the grayscale, the less they are on. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.